Today we're going to look at the absolute worst thing every single major SpongeBob Squarepants character has done. Let's begin with the characters who have made it 25 and a quarter years without any major marks against them. These are the not so bad deeds. It's a pretty unsurprising turn of events. Mermaid Man is the least problematic character in the running today. Fans of classic SpongeBob will remember him as the superhero who stood valiantly against evil in all of its forms, no matter how big or small. And no matter how senile and clueless Mermaid Man himself was. While he's almost always a total sweetheart, he has his flawed moments. But even then, they're almost always due to his ignorance. When he condescendingly thought Barnacle Boy wouldn't be able to eat an adult-sized Krabby Patty, he wasn't trying to be rude, he was just concerned that his young ward would be wasting food. But the one time he's done something truly malicious, even just a tiny bit, was ditching SpongeBob at the diner. In his second appearance, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy reunite with SpongeBob after he wins their conch signal in a contest.
Where's the danger, son? Bring it on!
When SpongeBob abused the privilege, Barnacle Boy was ready to destroy the signal, so to console a crying SpongeBob, Mermaid Man decided to invite him out on patrol for the afternoon. Despite it being Mermaid Man's idea, however, he was more than willing to go along with Barnacle Boy's plan to ditch him at the diner. While Barnacle Boy was the one who suggested ditching SpongeBob in the first place, the fact that Mermaid Man was willing to go along with it is the closest to evil he's ever come. Which says a lot about him, since really it isn't that evil at all. I mean, honestly, if we spent a day getting unintentionally sabotaged by SpongeBob, we'd probably be ready to call it quits as well. You could have just, told him you were tired, though. SpongeBob wouldn't keep elderly people from resting if they just asked. Old people are the greatest! Communication is key, people. And now for Bikini Bottom's resident poet, Gary the Snail. Who doesn't love Gare Bear? The correct answer is nobody. Gary's just an irresistibly charming little mollusk, but that's not always a good thing. In the episode Dumped, we saw him use that charm to abandon SpongeBob over a cookie. Now, I know Gary has had his fair share of naughty pet behavior that might seem worse than this. In Gary Takes a Bath, he spends the whole time trolling SpongeBob just to avoid taking a bath. At one point, letting him blow himself up. Knowing how smart Gary is, though, and how he clearly adores SpongeBob, we think he probably just figured that SpongeBob is borderline immortal and resultantly didn't think much of one little explosion. Happens all the time in Bikini Bottom, after all. Even Squidward doesn't complain about it too much. In Dumped, however, well, we see Gary's smarts used in another way. Despite seeing how heartbroken SpongeBob was, Gary decided to leave him for days to stay with Fratric. Gary, being a two-timing pet, was not on anyone's Bikini Bottom bingo card. But the cherry on top is that it was all for a cookie in Patrick's pocket. Gary abandoned the sponge who raised him, toying with his best friend's emotions to cast him aside, all for just a singular cookie.
I thought what we had was special!
It's not evil, sure, but it shows that Gary is willing to go to some extreme lengths to get his sugar fix. But really, aren't we all? Next is another one of the more heroic Bikini Bottomites, Barnacle Boy. Barnacle Boy is younger and less senile than his partner in crime stopping to some extent, so we have to look at him a bit more critically. While Barnacle Boy is generally responsible and good-natured, he does have his evil moments. Most notably in Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 5, Barnacle Boy joined the side of every villain is lemons.
I'm crossing over to the dark side.
After Mermaid Man wouldn't stop treating him like a child and the others in the Krusty Krab teased him, excluding SpongeBob, Barnacle Boy decided to team up with Man Ray and the Dirty Bubble to commit evil misdeeds. These misdeeds included teasing hormonal teenagers at Makeout Reef, ding-dong ditching elderly people, and serving explosive ice cream. If this weren't SpongeBob, we could qualify that last one as attempted murder, but again, explosions just happen here. All he actually did was pull a few goofy pranks around town, not too bad for a one-time supervillain. All Barnacle Boy really wanted was proper respect from his super pal, and was ready to rejoin forces with him once he got it, even laughing at his own inability to actually eat an adult-sized Krabby Patty. Next up, we have a character who might be way lower than you would actually expect, Squilliam Fancy Son. Squilliam is one of the most consistently mean and unlikable characters in the entire series, which begs the question of why on earth he isn't any higher, especially since he has no positive episodes or even any obvious redeeming qualities. But while he spends all of his major appearances constantly mocking Squidward, that's really about as far as he goes. Of course, but it's not like he's actively sabotaging Squiddy or doing anything particularly harmful to others. Heck, he's even done some good, picking up enough litter to get a statue in his honor.
Bless you, Squilliam Fancy Son. Bless you.
He's still a jerk, but in terms of individual misdeeds, Squilliam is far from the worst character in the series. Squilliam certainly isn't the only character whose worst deed concerns Squidward. Larry the Lobster is a guy who can befriend almost anyone, and Squidward's negative attitude is the reason for that, almost. His worst deed was in the episode Squid Plus One, where Squidward desperately tries to find a +1 to an art gallery opening. opening who isn't SpongeBob, only to find out that he just isn't that great at getting along with people. Hard to believe, I know. Anyway, Larry is one of the people he does manage to get along with. After hanging out with the creatine-loving crustacean for a while, Squidward decides to make the incredible decision to openly insult Larry for liking protein shakes. No, I'm serious, that's it. Larry punching Squidward in this moment was somewhat understandable, but it does stand out as a weirdly violent outburst from a character who's normally completely nice, especially since it was just over his liking protein shakes. Then again, it's no weirder than Squidward choosing to roast his new friend over his beverage choice, so potato. Side note, anyone else want to know what Larry meant when he said protein shakes saved his life? Did they motivate him, or was there like a sentient protein shake that saved him from drowning? This is SpongeBob, so it could be. Finally, let's talk about Bikini Bottom's greatest mystery, Pearl Krabs, Mr. Krabs' whale daughter. Mr. Krabs may be greedy, but he has his good points, like genuinely loving and caring for his daughter. In selling out, however, we find out that familial love doesn't always go both ways. In this episode, Pearl kicks Mr. Krabs out of his own house. Now, on paper, this isn't much different from Pearl's other misdeeds, which all just boil down to her being a slightly bratty teenager. But in this episode, she lost her temper with Krabs for the crime of wanting to spend time with his daughter. That's just mean. He wasn't being cheap this time. He wasn't repeatedly interrupting her. He literally asked her if she wanted to hang out. It's just one bratty moment, which is pretty typical for any teenager, so we'll give her some grace and keep her in our lowest category. With that, we've reached the deeds that had wider spanning consequences. These deeds are horrible, but forgivable. Let's move into the more infamous deeds by talking about Fred, the infamous
My leg!
guy. In the earlier episodes, he wasn't really notable beyond being one of the many recurring background fish in the series. In My Leg, however, we finally get an explanation as to why his leg is constantly getting broken. Love. No, seriously, Fred fell in love with a nurse, and rather than asking her out like a normal person, he decides to waste hospital time and resources by repeatedly injuring himself just so he can spend more time with the nurse.
Sponge bath time!
Fred is actively choosing to go about his romance in a way that takes hospital resources away from people who actually need them, but who need them for reasons other than self-mutilation. We know it isn't his intention to inconvenience the hospital staff, but even so, it's just a really creepy way to go about wooing your love interest. Surprisingly, Sandy's worst deed has made it to our second category. As nice as Sandy usually is, we just can't ignore the fact that in the episode Texas, she chased down SpongeBob and Patrick with the intent of extreme violence. Now, what did SpongeBob and Patrick do to justify being chased, lassoed, and blown up in the latter's case? Well, they insulted Texas. Sure, it was a rude move, albeit one intended to lure her to a surprise party at the Krusty Krab. But while we understand having strong pride in your home, trying to straight up wrangle two of your best friends over some petty insults is taking things a step too far. With Larry punching Squidward, that was the case of someone he just met insulting him for basically no reason. Here, Sandy was ready to bludgeon two of her best friends over some jokes. She probably didn't plan on doing anything beyond opening a can of Trixia whooping on their butts, which keeps her at a relatively low point on the list, but knowing Sandy's strength, even that might have been enough to land her in prison for life. Up next is a pretty unsurprising entry, Bubble Bass. As Bikini Bottom's resident neckbeard, he doesn't have a lot of positive attributes. From tricking SpongeBob into believing that he failed at his job in his debut appearance, for seemingly no reason other than to save $2, by the way.
You lose.
To tricking SpongeBob and Pat into helping him move in exchange for free lunch that he ate right in front of them. Bubble Bass is a pathological liar with a cruel streak to boot. Heck, I saw this guy scalping Pokemon cards just last week. Pretty shameless, right? But his worst deed comes from an appearance you might have forgotten about. In the episode Fun, Bubble Bass has a non-speaking role. On the surface, he isn't doing harm at first, just going to see a movie and apparently tolerating SpongeBob enough to sit next to him. When SpongeBob points out that Bubble Bass is sitting on top of Plankton, his new friend, Bubble Bass proceeds to squish Plankton with his massive booty. Like, he has concerning control with it. Like, he knows exactly what he's doing. We could excuse this as him just not seeing Plankton, although it'd still be kind of rude. Plankton is tiny after all, but in the end of the episode, when Plankton lands in Bubble Bass's hand alongside some jelly beans, he deliberately chases Plankton around his own hand, probably intending to eat the little tyrant. Either Bubble Bass has concerningly little regard for single-celled life, or he really needs some new glasses. Up next, when it comes to Squidward tentacles, we can't deny that we were a bit tempted to call being a Squidward his worst deed. But the fact is that Squidward has his good-natured moments, despite his grouchy, egotistical personality. He also has his really bad moments, though, particularly in the later seasons. In the episode Sports, though, we see him at his worst, when SpongeBob and Patrick mistakenly use their equipment to destroy Squidward's garden. Rather than confronting them in a reasonable way, Squidward decides to get revenge by teaching them how to play sports in ways that get them viciously injured, even incentivizing them to get hurt as much as possible, since pain will get them more points. He had a right to be annoyed at SpongeBob and Patrick, especially for messing up his garden, but he responded to honest mistakes with vicious, borderline borderline torture. Thankfully, Sandy showed up before his bullying went any further. Sandy's always looking out for SpongeBob, provided he isn't insulting Texas. And it's certainly good that SpongeBob has someone to stick up for him, because a seemingly throwaway line in season 1 reveals his absolute darkest moment. First things first, all of SpongeBob's bad deeds are done not because of malice, but because of sheer well-meaning ignorance. In our video ranking the little square dude's deeds from good to evil, we made this pretty clear. But in the episode Sandy's Rocket, there was one moment we somehow forgot to include in that video. SpongeBob's Whirlybird incident. Yeah, SpongeBob killed at least like 30 people. That's lowballing it. Now, we know he didn't mean to, because SpongeBob wouldn't hurt a fly, but ignorance aside, this man literally has a double-digit kill count, at least because of his reckless whirlybird operation. Considering how poorly he operates a boatmobile, SpongeBob definitely should have known better than to try and fly a helicopter, but knowing him, he probably just accidentally spilled the Krabby Patty sauce on the control panel or something. My theory is that Sandy got a law degree just to get him off death row, which I insist seems completely in character. And just shy of our final category, we have the worst deed of Mrs. Puff. If you're a SpongeBob fanatic like us, I bet you've already guessed hers. Trying to murder SpongeBob. Honestly, I don't even think this one needs much explanation, since Demolition Doofus is one of the most infamous episodes in SpongeBob history. Here, SpongeBob injures Mrs. Puff one too many times, rupturing her inflation sac and ensuring that she may never puff up again. This results in her entering SpongeBob into a demolition derby in the hopes that he'll be killed in the carnage. The only reason she isn't in our final category is because of what she'd been through up until that point. Mrs. Puff not only is implied to have PTSD from her SpongeBob-related injuries, but here he has permanently disfigured her and ignored her requests to leave her alone. We aren't saying the murder attempt was justified at all, but it's clear that she was far from being in a sound state of mind. We wanted to save the worst of the worst deeds for those characters who expressed utter selfishness, cruelty, or even downright depravity. So with that, let's get into the irredeemably evil deeds. Despite a title like that, not everyone in this category is truly evil per se. Take Patrick Star, for example. In terms of misdeeds, Patrick is basically SpongeBob on steroids. He's generally a laid-back, nice dude. The issue comes with his mischievous side and his lack of a brain. Patrick's ignorance makes SpongeBob look like a genius in comparison, but ignorant or not, torturing Squidward to get ink lemonade was a big no-no. Ink lemonade is one of the absolute vilest SpongeBob episodes out there, and it's all because of our favorite sea star. When Patrick inadvertently discovers that people love lemonade made with Squidward's ink, he proceeds to spend the next 11 minutes terrorizing Squidward for more ink. As dumb as Patrick is, he knew fully well that Squidward didn't want to be terrorized for his ink, because on top of him being very clearly embarrassed and terrified, he literally told him this. Patrick was repeatedly assaulting his neighbor, both physically and psychologically, throughout this whole episode. To make the matter worse, he did so for seemingly no reason, since he didn't even seem to be making money off of the lemonade. As horrific as this was, though, if there's any character we could see purposefully siphoning someone's bodily fluids while simultaneously seeing absolutely nothing wrong with doing so, it's Patrick. Patrick's always ridden this weird spectrum between chill guy and a literal sociopath, and this was the one time he landed all the way on the latter side of the spectrum. Next, we have one of the most iconic SpongeBob villains out there, Doodlebob. Really, we could use pretty much anything Doodlebob does in any of his appearances to be his worst, so we're gonna do that. Everything Doodlebob does seems to be instinctively meant to cause as much destruction as possible. The first thing he does after being drawn to life by SpongeBob is to knock on Squidward's door and proceed to beat the living crap out of him. Throughout the rest of that episode, he comes up with creative ways to bludgeon SpongeBob and Patrick, who are technically his parents, by the way, until SpongeBob traps him in a book, at which point he finally seems happy. We'd place Doodlebob in a higher, more evil position, but he seems to be more acting on impulse than out of malice, and we want to save our last few spots for those who really knew what they were doing. Now, let's talk about Bubble Buddy. Just like in our good to evil, he's ranked as a bit more evil than you might expect by looking at him, but behind that innocent pair of non-existent eyes lurks a truly soulless madman. He watched Scooter die. He buried him in the sand and didn't even forget him. He just watched as Scooter experienced high tide.
Dudes, he made me experience high tide! Oh!
He could have saved him, but he didn't. This was the exact moment Bubble Buddy became convicted of manslaughter. We're really getting to the thick of it now because it's time to talk about Mr. Eugene, Krabs' worst deed. Krabs isn't all bad. He's a lot of bad, and there are plenty of moments we could have chosen from, though. With most of his evil moments, like selling SpongeBob's soul for 62 cents, Krabs was either momentarily blinded by greed, seized with remorse after the fact, or some mixture of both. But there are exceptions, and the worst of these has to be his actions in One Course Meal, which ended up driving Plankton Plankton to suicide.
Can't you see I'm trying to get run over?
When Krabs learns that Plankton is terrified of whales, which makes no sense since Plankton hasn't interacted with Pearl before, but whatever.
I prefer salad over plankton anyway.
He decides to dress up as his daughter to terrorize Plankton. Now, if this were just a defense mechanism to keep him from stealing the formula, that would actually be reasonable. Heck, maybe he could have given Pearl her first after-school job as a bouncer, but no. Apparently, Krabs had a sadistic urge to straight up psychologically torture his business rival. And to make matters worse, he did this outside of working hours, laughing at Plankton's misery, even when SpongeBob told Krabs point blank that Plankton was lying in the road forlorn. It's not just the cruelty of the deed that feels like a bit much for Mr. Krabs, but it's the total lack of any remorse whatsoever that makes this whole episode a serious mark on his record. For better or for worse, I can defend Krabs on a lot of things, but this one's too far for even me to give a pass on. Our most haunting character yet, the Flying Dutchman, is up next. As a ghost who lives, or after lives, to haunt the seven seas, Dutchy is pretty much always trying to one-up himself by terrorizing the civilians of the sea however he can. But his worst deed was implied in his very first on-screen appearance in Scaredy Pants, where he threatened to steal the souls of the Bikini Bottomites. This was no empty threat either. The Dutchman is one of the most powerful characters in the SpongeBob universe. He's able to open portals to other dimensions, blow fire from his nose, haunt his victims with countless convoluted illusions, and, most terrifyingly of all, tie a sentient monkey knot. The monkey. The Dutchman has plenty of ways to terrorize his foes, and he relishes in using them, even implied to be a sort of Grim Reaper-esque figure, and he isn't the only one who takes pleasure in terrorizing mortals. For our bronze medal of depravity, King Neptune is up next. The Flying Dutchman definitely does evil more frequently than Neptune, but we have to give him a little more slack since he is a tormented soul who was never put to rest. King Neptune, on the other hand, is the ruler of the sea, meaning he should be trying to protect the mortals rather than tormenting them, but being a tyrannical undersea god, he has his fair share of needless cruelty under his belt, and nothing quite outshines the time. He imprisoned his own son on a deserted island. Okay, yeah, he felt bad about it. They made up in the end, yada yada, whatever, who cares? The fact is that Neptune abandoned and isolated his son for years, and his reasoning for it, he didn't care about being a god that much. Like, heaven forbid a kid want to act like a kid instead of terrorizing civilians, which isn't even what a god should be doing, mind you. The worst part of it is that the straw that broke the camel's back was Triton creating an antidote to cure mortal diseases. Neptune's got a lot of work to do on himself, and I don't just mean on his hairline. For the silver medal of depravity, we move on to SpongeBob's newest movie at the time of this video. Karen Plankton's worst deed came from Plankton's big Netflix movie, trying to take over Bikini Bottom. After Plankton puts his wife down one too many times, she decides to remove her empathy chip, turning her into a mindless killing machine. Oh, sorry, this is a kid's show. Removing her empathy chip turns her into a mindless Bikini Bottomite kidnapping and evicting machine. She manages to scoop up all of Bikini Bottom's buildings and most of its people, effectively rendering the population homeless, and planning to use her newfound giant mech form to take over the universe. In terms of the sheer scope of her plan, Karen would be taking home the gold medal easily, if it weren't for the fact that she essentially lobotomized herself and ultimately wouldn't have gone so far if Plankton hadn't pushed her. That said, she was still glad to take over the world as husband and wife after Plankton said he was sorry, which means that while global conquest wasn't her first choice, she still didn't mind going with it. But we won't patronize you. The top spot goes to the most obvious choice, Sheldon J. Plankton. He's about as lovably evil as a cartoon villain can get, and the same can be said for his biggest scheme ever from way back in 2004, Plan Z. In the original SpongeBob Squarepants movie, Plankton unleashes what still stands as his most threatening plan. First, he framed Mr. Krabs for stealing King Neptune's crown. This would have more than likely gotten Krabs executed on the spot, but since SpongeBob volunteered to retrieve the crown himself, Krabs got 6 days frozen solid before its demise, during which Plankton taunted him while easily stealing that sweet, sweet formula. While planning to get his former best friend murdered and sending an assassin after SpongeBob and Patrick would have been bad enough to get him near the top already, Phase 2 of Plankton's plan was even more sinister. By selling Krabby Patties at the Chum Bucket, he managed to get all of the Bikini Bottomites in fashionable bucket helmets, blissfully unaware that they were mind control helmets that made them mindless slaves to Plankton. Men, women, children, squirrels, lobsters, and even adorable pet snails. If you breathed, you were a slave to Plankton, and that was exactly how he wanted it. Plan Z wasn't your everyday Plankton plot. It was a twisted underwater coup d'etat that revealed that Plankton's ego was unfathomably larger than we could have ever expected. Statues of himself as far as the eye could see, and a complete lack of any free will but his own, was what Plankton wanted, and were it not for SpongeBob and Patrick, and David Hasselhoff, he would have succeeded with his plan. As hilarious as Plankton is, the original movie really hammers in the fact that he's still a seriously threatening villain when he wants to be. No wonder they haven't topped it in 21 years.